So I'm James Velitis, and with me is Kieran
The Quarries on O'Regan.
O'Regan. This is the Axiom of the Infinite Unknown, episode 9. Today it's going to be a bit more of an exploratory conversation, starting with perhaps some talk around the incredibly consequential issue of the Uyghur Genocide, and I use that word purposefully. Genocide. I think it definitely constitutes a genocide at this point, and effectively we're going to start there and explore it, not so much in its details, but in as much as it speaks to problems with the West. Just to quickly clarify my statement, when I say genocide, we're talking about a problem in China wherein Uyghur Muslims are being imprisoned in now the millions, over 1 million, perhaps or nearing 2 million. It's very hard to get statistics on this, as you can imagine. China aren't particularly upfront with how many people they're putting into concentration camps, and they kicked anybody out a while ago that could possibly document it. So that's an issue. They're being sterilized, so they're not allowed to reproduce. So that really that's one technological way that the Nazis didn't have that available to them en masse, but China do. They can sterilize the woman, and the sterilizations are. I think it was something like 80% of all of the IUD placements in the entirety of China occurred in Xinjiang, which makes up 1.8% of the population. 80% of all IUD placements, so the prevention of births, and they aren't allowed to be removed other than by Chinese officials. And Xinjiang, just for the record, is a Uyghur Muslim population almost entirely. So mass sterilization, and what do you do about the men? You put them in concentration camps. So we're looking at a serious effort to get rid of a race of people, and this in the face of mass apathy from every other nation across the world. So why is that? That's sort of the question that you end up wrestling with when you learn about this, because you think, well, people aren't talking about it, so perhaps it's not quite as big of an issue as the numbers on my screen are telling me it is. And I'm hearing a lot about Black lives and how they matter. So that's clearly a much bigger issue. And this speaks to a problem with reasoning. It speaks to the availability heuristic. And it speaks to something more insidious, which I think Kieran could maybe expound upon now. If you'd like to go ahead, Kieran.
Yeah, cheers, man. So basically, we did previous episodes talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think the episode was called the OG problem or something like that, or the OG black and white
dichotomy.
Yeah,
the OG dichotomy. Yeah.
So I think if people were curious about the way, I suppose, a more expanded view on what it is that we think about this situation and the data around it and everything, then that's worth checking out. But the way that I kind of seeing this Black Lives Matter movement and the organization itself is that it's to say, okay, let's say they've identified a problem, right? And the way I've seen it is basically that the organization and the movement has identified a problem. And I think of it like as in terms of scale, it's a rodent problem. But their solution for this problem and the way that people are talking and this momentum around the ideology that's steering all this energy that's been given to the movement, their solution for the problem, not necessarily all the people that are providing momentum to this situation and providing funding or sharing stuff and all that, because I think there's vast majority of people that are contributing momentum and energy to this train, this critical social justice, Black Lives Matter train, are coming from a place of genuinely feeling that they're fighting some enormous injustice. So I err on the side of assuming the best of people in that scenario. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that they're giving momentum to a train without realizing they're jumping onto a train without realizing that the objective of the driver is the ideology of the drivers is to crash the train into the station, because the station itself is Western civilization. And that sounds very dramatic, but it's evidenced in the scale of this situation relative to the disproportionate amount of focus being placed on it. So just as a very simplistic run on the data in the US, because I think this situation in the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, the amount of energy and focus that's been given and attention that's been given relative to the scale of the issue, the size of the issue, and you look at that in relative to the scale of the issue with the, as James had called it, the genocide of Uyghur Muslims in northwestern China, in the Xinjiang province, and the proportion of the disproportionate amount of, in a low way, the amount of attention that's been given to that. So, for example, as James had mentioned, estimates of how many people are in concentration camps over there vary from 1 million to closer to 2, depending on the source. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, it's at least 1 million, if not closer to 1.5 million in some places. But when you look at, and this isn't even looking at, I'm going to read a few quotes now on some other. There was a tribunal last year called the China Tribunal that took place, and it was led by a guy called QC Geoffrey Miller, who was one of the top dogs in the prosecution of the war crimes of Slobodan Milosevic back in the day. And I've been following this Uyghur situation in China since March maybe of last year. I was kind of late on the show. It was only about March, maybe April last year I got really into this. And I even missed this tribunal. I didn't even know it happened. It happened last June. This is how much it flew under the radar. And I'll get to that in a second as to why that may have been the case. But so just give an idea of the disproportion. Okay, so in the US, in short, just to give it an idea of the scale of the Black Lives Matter, what it is the Black Lives Matter movement is addressing, or claims to be addressing. The scale of that is, okay, in short, roughly 1,000 people are killed every year. There's 350 million people in the US. There's about 1,000 people killed by cops every year. Of that 1,000 people, 95% of them are armed. And of the 5% roughly that aren't armed, about 25% of them are black. But only about 13% of the population of the US are black, so there's a disproportionate amount there. And we get into, in the previous podcast, we talk about that one, episode 6 or whatever the OG one was, false dichotomy. We talk about what's going on there, and it involves a disproportionate engagement in crime and all that stuff, and addressing upstream issues versus downstream. We go into it in there. But let's say even if there was an issue, let's say even if we ignore any of the multivariate causes of why that's the case, and you just look at the numbers, it's about 10, let's say 10 to 20 people that happen to be black are killed by cops every year. And even if they are racist, and even if it was just because of racism and nothing else, and there was no other factors at play, and there was a totally equal engagement in crime across all ethnicities and skin colors and everything, and it was a totally diverse, equally diverse engagement in crime, totally proportional to the population per 100,000. Even if that was the case, the scale is still 10 to 20 people that are killed by cops every year in America, unarmed, that happen to be black. 1 to 1.5 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, right? That's worth paying attention to. So, but I think about it in terms of the amount of attention that's given to both of those scenarios from people who supposedly are worried about the oppression of victim groups. And then think about the energy that's been given, the attention that's been given to both of those situations. This is not to say that there isn't problems to be addressed in the US. We talked about that in the previous podcast. Of course, there are always, no society is perfect. But we have to think in terms of reason, in terms of proportionate allotment of energy and resources towards problems. So again, they're using the Black Lives Matter solution, the organization, because it is an organization. Not a lot of people realize that. It is an organization, and their solution to the rodent problem is to nuke the house. That's not a reasonable solution, obviously. So I'll give an example. So what I want to read is a few quotes from this, the China tribunal. So I'm just going to read basically the summary judgment. So this involves basically, summary judgment, independent tribunal into forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China. I'm just going to read the opening page, and then there's a couple of quotes on the Uyghur Muslims. So it basically goes like this. For over a decade, the People's Republic of China has stood publicly accused of acts of cruelty and wickedness that match the cruelty and wickedness of medieval torturers and executioners. If the accusations are true, then thousands of innocents have been killed to order, having the physical integrity of their beings, their bodies, cut open while still alive for their kidneys, livers, hearts, lungs, cornea, and skin to be removed and turned into commodities for sale. Doctors killed those innocent people simply because they pursued truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, and lived lives of healthy exercise and meditation that was seen as dangerous in the interests and objectives of the totalitarian state of People's Republic of China. So what they're referring to in that statement is largely the Falun Gong group. I don't even know what to call them, but the Falun Gong people that partake in Falun Gong are a major focus in this. And yet, the People's Republic of China has done little to challenge the accusations, except to say that they were politically motivated lies, and governments around the world and international organizations, all required to protect the rights of mankind, have expressed doubt as to the accusations, thereby justifying their doing nothing to save those who were in due course to be killed to order. If the accusations are motivated, they will inevitably be likened to the atrocities committed in conflicts of the 20th century. But victim for victim and death for death, the gassing of the Jews by the Nazis, the massacre of the Khmer Rouge by the Khmer Rouge, or the butchery to death of the Rwandan Tutsis may not be worse than cutting out the hearts, other organs, and very souls of living, blameless, harmless, peaceable people. But if the accusations are proved to be in this judgment, then the above images and the words that describe them must be minimized. Priority must instead be given to the process where judgments can be made free of emotion and where universal principles of justice can be applied to that process in the interest of any who, yet living, may be at risk, and to avoid prejudice or prejudgment falling on the People's Republic of China. So that was the opening page, but basically this is a kind of a summary judgment that essentially the whole document, we can include a link to the whole document, but it relates to Falun Gong and Uyghur Muslims essentially having testing done on them, so that they're basically blood testing, tissue testing for match, and then essentially killed to order. And this isn't some just like makeshift thing. This is an actual, you can look it up, just look up China Tribunal 2019. And this is happening by the thousands, according to this tribunal, and their suggestion is, look, the international community needs to get involved in this immediately. So that's the first thing in regards to a bit of scale. And now, one last little bit, just from a bit of perspective, because I wanted to highlight the numbers, because I think it provides a bit of perspective. So again, in short, 10 to 20 people are killed per year, unarmed, by police officers in the US. And then this Black Lives Matter movement focused on this as if it's the apocalypse. And this, again, is not to say, and I feel like it annoys me to even have to say this, but this is not to say that I'm providing any justification for those deaths. I'm not in any way. But I just feel like the current climate, I have to keep caveating everything. But if Black lives really mattered, would they not be focused on the open air slave markets in Libya at the moment? where Africans are sold for a few $100s on a daily basis, or how so as slaves. So again, there's this huge focus in America and this obsession, which, not that it doesn't need to be addressed, of course, to provide another caveat on the past history, the atrocious slavery that took place in the US in the past, the transatlantic slave trade and all that. But there are tens of millions of people currently living as slaves that aren't getting any real attention from the West. So there's this obsession in the US with its own fucked up past that, of course, has happened. And there's still elements of racism, of course, there's all that. But there are, according to the Global Slavery Index, 40.3 million slaves currently in existence in the world. So I'm going to read 2 paragraphs from here and then we'll go from there. So this is from the globalslaveryindex.org 2018 findings. So what does the data tell us about modern slavery? It is widely acknowledged that measuring modern slavery is a difficult undertaking, not least because no single source provides suitable and reliable data on all forms of modern slavery. In developing the global estimates of modern slavery, the Walk Free Foundation and the ILO adapted a methodology that combined survey research involving face-to-face interviews with more than 71,000 people in 53 local languages, with administrative data on victims of trafficking who had been assisted in the IOM. An estimate of forced labor imposed by state authorities was derived from validated sources and systematic review of comments from the ILO supervisory bodies with regard to the ILO conventions on forced labor. We can include links to this if people want to read it afterwards. This is the last paragraph I'm going to read. An estimated 40.3 million men, women, and children were victims of modern slavery on any given day in 2016. Of these, 24.9 million were in forced labor and 15.4 million were living in forced marriage. Women and girls are vastly overrepresented, making up 71% of victims. Modern slavery is most prevalent in Africa, followed by Asia and the Pacific region. So again, if Black lives really mattered, would this not be getting a disproportionate amount or a proportionate amount of attention relative to the scale of the problem? But it's not, because of a whole load of cognitive biases like availability, heuristic that we'll discuss. But this is the kind of thing that's driving me absolutely mental with this Black Lives Matter movement and the attention it's getting and the way that it's focused the attention. What it's focused on is so absurd, given the realities of the world and the scale of the problems that are facing humanity in terms of global suffering. And this is what's so frustrating to me, and this is representative, like, of a bigger issue that we're going to go on to, which relates around, I think, a lack of appreciation for the waters in which we swim. You know, to use that kind of parable we talked about a couple of weeks ago, basically, where there's not enough appreciation for how good we actually have it in the West. And as a result, what it is that because we're solely in it's the West that solely has the ability, because of resources and wealth and our ability to influence the world, it's us that solely have the ability to be able to help those in the worst situations on earth. Hence, it's our responsibility to do so. We have the tools.
Yeah.
Yet, we're focused on this ritualistic self-hate. And then we're over here in myself in Ireland, James in the UK, and we're watching America commit ritualistic seppuku out of shame. As if it's the worst place on earth. Which again, not perfect, but it's also not China, and it's not Saudi Arabia, and it's not Libya, and it's not any of these other places where a civil rights movement wouldn't even be able to take place. It wouldn't even have the freedom to take place. So sorry, I'm after going on there for a while, but I think that was their kind of...
No, that was good setup, dude. It was good setup. I think you're right in pointing out the, I would say, unjustifiable self-flagellation in the face of a default human position, which involves mass suffering, starvation, and violent death. And I think given that human default, um, the inability to appreciate what we built upon the back of a serious endeavor to, as I called them earlier, to build the tools to create the society we have. You know, from the early 18th century with the Enlightenment movement, we took seriously the project of human progress, and progress has probably always been wanted. I don't think you could go back 150,000 years and ask a more primitive human, "Hey, do you want things to get worse?" In as much as they could understand the question, I don't think the answer would be yes. But it's only recently we've been able to do it. Like I say, within the past hundreds of years. So I think the lack of appreciation for that is not, I don't want to say unforgivable, but it speaks to a massive ignorance. I think it speaks to one of the problems maybe we'll discuss is this vacuum in early education where there should be a space for instilling the generations that are growing up with a deep appreciation for what we have and what has come before now and what has helped us to achieve what we've achieved. And that includes things like the scientific method and the philosophy, ideology, I suppose you could call it, of human rights, the sanctity of the human, and even capitalism and free markets. That we can attribute to capitalism perhaps as many human lives saved and as much human well-being brought about as to anything. I think it would, what do you think if you were to ask one of these people who adhere to this understanding of the world, you know, that the idea that cops are just about the most dangerous thing to face a person in their life in say Chicago, like the problem is a police officer. Do you think they'd have? Do you think it would be a lack of interest in problems beyond their borders, or do you think it would be a very parochial interest, a sort of anything that speaks to their already preordained ideas about what's wrong? They'll let that creep in, but if it's something that almost negates or contradicts what they think, they'll just ignore it. So something like China, do you think they'll just, given that information, do you think they ignore it or they don't care, or what do you think would be their response to being told, do you not think that this is more worthy of our attention? What do you think they'd say? Like, we just want to deal with a problem that I can actually deal with. Do you think perhaps it would be, I've asked so many questions, I'll let you actually answer one of them. Maybe it's just a belief that they can't do anything about it, and so they'll focus on what's in front of them?
I think there's three different, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think I've been trying to categorize because it's such a messy issue, because when you talk to someone who's all about this Black Lives Matter movement, or you see in the media someone sharing stuff, or on social media someone sharing stuff, or the type of articles that are written and people that are supporting this, there's different people, which is why it's so complex. There's different people at play, who have different ideas. So again, I suppose I'd like to emphasize that I genuinely believe that all human beings are intrinsically equally worthy. Basically, they're like, there's all human beings are equal, but all ideas are not. That's this as a starting premise. So with that, when I'm talking about these people, I don't want to mean it. I don't want it to come across as if I'm trying to be diminutive or combative. It's just that they have a certain set of ideas and views in the world, and I kind of take quite a Buddhist view on life itself, which is that life is suffering, and so much of what it is that we do is basically the avoidance of suffering. And so anyway, without getting on that rabbit hole, basically the three different types of person in terms of the ideas that they have that I'm seeing, if I was to try and break it down. The first type, which I hazard is the majority, is the kind of person that genuinely feels like by contributing momentum to this situation, by sharing stuff, by funding BLM, the organization, by whatever, by taking a knee at sports games and all this stuff, they genuinely feel that they're contributing to the fight against an enormous injustice. So it's coming from a good place. The second type of person then, I think, is what you could classify as a kind of a typical bully, which, and there, again, these all have a similar cause, which is the first two have a kind of a similar cause. Or anyway, so the bully basically is, the typical bully is someone who has an unresolved sense of powerlessness in the world because of some kind of trauma, and then they gain or regain some sense of power by having domination over someone else or something else. So it's just they exhibit some kind of power. Basically, they acquire a sense of power by dominating someone else. Basically, so that's what I think is a second type of person that's contributing to this situation, is that it's people that are inherently, let's say, again, I don't mean this in a diminutive way, but it sounds bad, is like, let's say someone who their own weakness is being made up for by trying to bring other people down. And the third type of person then is the anti-Western ideologue, let's say. And the first type of person who just basically thinks that the West is the worst place on earth and needs to be torn down. You know, that's why it's the third type of person that I think is, again, in terms of ideas, not in terms of their intrinsic worth as a human being, but in terms of their ideas, is what makes me somewhat sympathetic of the likes of Jordan Peterson or Douglas Murray when they talk about the kind of Marxist underpinnings for the ideology. You know, and then you look at, well, but I like to refer to James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose in their description of the origins of this critical social justice movement. But regardless, the first two
just quickly, Kieran. So you've got believers, so the people who truly think they're making a difference, that there's a problem, and they can contribute to the solution. So that's the first type of people. You've got the bullies, and they're insecure and perhaps actually just they enjoy the battle. But are they also the powerless people where they're making up for their insecurity?
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember that.
Yeah.
So those are the
bully.
the
bully. I'm just kind of describing. I kind of went on about the bully is the person who has this sense of powerlessness, and then they're making up for that by attacking other people or being able to.
And then it's the third type, the anti-Western ideologue, the rhetoric of the US or the UK are uniquely evil, be it racism or colonialism.
So they're the three types of people that I see, and that's why this is such a murky issue to talk about, because to anyone you discuss, well, they're like, of course there is racism in the US, or they'll say, and then it's like, oh yeah, and then and then someone who's even genuinely compassionate might see a video of some crazy stuff with some of these Antifa, let's say bullies essentially, or people that are
I think you'd class them as bullies.
And then maybe some of those Antifa people also fall in. There's a Venn diagram there with that. There's probably a Venn diagram. It's hard to label them all with the one thing, but if you just take the type of idea, right? So in that sense, the first type of person, I think, in terms of this
No,
genuine
actually, I think
caring.
you're right, Kieran. Before you go on to say first type of person, I think you're more right in saying that this is more like the ocean, personality traits. I think they're traits of people, aren't
Yeah,
they?
yeah,
I think we should talk about them as traits because in thinking about it, Antifa, there'll be a strong belief that the West is evil.
yeah.
There'll be a serious insecurity that makes them bullies, and there might be a part of them as well that thinks they're actually
Genuinely
doing
thinks they're
something
on.
good.
Yeah, they
Yeah, yeah.
genuinely
So I
think, like,
think
they do think they're the good guys. Like they
it'll
genuinely.
be different degrees
Yeah,
and different people. Yeah.
yeah,
So go on. Go, you were
yeah.
about to
No,
say something about the.
that's definitely worth emphasizing. Yeah, because it again, humans are not
Yeah.
simplistic beings. Like so, but in that, I think what feeds into each of those three things. The
Mm,
first one is very simply an availability heuristic, which is
yeah.
the narrative that's in the standard media supports this idea that that like if a video of an unarmed black man emerges because it has happened, or video of an unarmed black man getting killed by a cop, if that emerges into the media, it blows up and it becomes a really big thing because it fits this narrative.
Mm,
It fits this anti-Western racist narrative, and also whereas like we talked about in previous like equivalent videos like Tony Tempe and stuff, they don't emerge into the media. They don't of white people being killed in the exact same circumstances. They don't make it because they don't fit the narrative. And but then simultaneously, what also doesn't fit the narrative is non-white people being really unpleasant to other non-white people. So that's why like this Libyan slave trade is massively, it's way worse than anything that's happening in the US racism wise. Way worse in terms of the scale, the numbers, the atrocities, but it doesn't get the attention. And I think if I was to be cynical, again, it doesn't fit the narrative of this anti-colonialist, anti-Western, ritualistic self-hatred
mm,
kind of thing. And then so it's easy to see where if people aren't being if people aren't being exposed to these ideas, their view on the world and their view on the types of evil that are worth focusing on are going to be skewed by what information they're exposed to. And then the third type of person, again, the third type, let's say archetype, the anti-Western ideologue, even independent of the bully, the anti-Western ideologue then that's a whole different thing. That's like an inbuilt like belief system that the West is responsible for all the evil on earth, that because of colonialism, essentially there's this rose-tinted view of the default state of human. They said lack of acknowledgement of the existence of the shadow, the propensity for evil that is within every single human being. There's a totally ignoring of the fact that, let's say, the transatlantic slave trade is focused on and colonialism is focused on, but transatlantic slave trade, the slaves were sold to the European slavers by other black people. There's a lack of acknowledgement of that. And in Africa, like there was a lack of acknowledgement of any time that there's this or let's say even for hundreds of years in Africa prior to the Europeans showing up, there was a horrendous slave trade going on. Slavery has been a part of the human existence across all cultures for thousands of years, across all different ethnicities, skin colors, religions, all that stuff. But yet there's this focus on the West did it, white people did it, and then
yeah. It's
colonialism
hard.
evil. Like
It's hard not to be condescending when I talk. I haven't actually had much opportunity to talk with people. It's only ever been I've in the past 4 months or so. I've only had maybe 4 or 5 engagements with people who hold to the sorts of views we're discussing here. And as I was saying, it's difficult not to condescend to them or to um, to see them as intellectually retarded, in the sense that this real immaturity in how they perceive the world. There's a racial essentialism which shocks me. That a genuine disbelief that a certain type of person with a certain skin color, a self-identified black person, could be just as much of an asshole as a self-identified white person, or a self-identified Asian person, or or any type of person, any group you could possibly construe, that it's going to comprise of a very similar percentage of horrible people, compassionate people, self-interested people, altruistic people. And there's this racial essentialism which is operating in their brain, where they see certain skin colors as innately either good or bad. And it's just such an infantile way to look at the world. And on top of that, then you see the immaturity bleed into things like we were discussing prior to this conversation, as a recent sort of burst of videos of racists being violently attacked, and this idea that this is how we deal with racist people. But it lacks any ability to just do the extra step in thinking, just the extra step in, but why is it the way to deal with racists? Like, yeah, they're saying horrible things, but sometimes you say horrible things. And if it was just okay to punch somebody as soon as you personally felt that they had said a horrible thing, everybody's free. It's open season on everybody to punch one another.
And who decides what a racist is?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Who defines,
I could define some of these people as racist. When you say something like white people are X, then you've described a group of people based on their skin color, and you've assumed something about them. I am within the realms of logic to describe you as racist. Do I now get to knock you out cold with a punch to the face? I don't think so. I don't think that's the way we go about this. And I don't think that's the way I change your mind. I don't think you wake up after that having thought, yeah, no, he made a really good point with his fist. I'm convinced. His fist really convinced me as soon as it hit my nose. Like, that's not the way we reason. And this was all to say, I've just this serious immaturity and just childish approach to all of these problems. Really serious issues are being dealt with by people with the minds of children. I worry about our inability to effectively tackle hard questions when we're willing to take the first easy answer that appeals to our already defined answer. That was just a sort of tangent off of what you were saying.
Yeah, and I think this, to build on that tangent, this opening of, I suppose you could think of it maybe, unless I'm misusing it, a kind of a Pandora's box to reference the Greek myth of violence. And it's not surprising to me, because this was inevitable to me, pretty much, given the public support for the illegal destruction of monuments and statues, in conjunction with this idea that words themselves constitute violence that's been propagated for years by this critical social justice ideology. Or silence is violence as well. Words are violence and silence is violence, apparently, according to this same ideology, that white people, unless they're anti-racist, it makes them racist because they're complicit in racism and all this shit. So, but this okaying of people, so like, this is a slippery slope, and people aren't thinking ahead to what's the downstream effect of making violence, physical violence, actual physical violence, bloodshed. What's the downstream effect of making that okay? Of justifying physical violence against mean words. So someone says mean words, and then it's okay that, and they're like I've seen, okay, some of these videos, one in particular I shared on Twitter, showed a fella saying some very unpleasant, genuinely racist things.
Yeah, no, abhorrent.
But at no point did the videos and any of the videos show him using any violence. He didn't use any physical force. He just said really unpleasant things. And then he gets knocked out by black dude. And then the response, you hear even people on the train saying, yeah, that's what you get. You can hear people in the video. And then you have even famous people online sharing it saying, yeah, that's what you get, how you deal with a racist and all that. And then they don't realize that this is not a single specific event. This is not an event that you can guarantee won't have negative ripples. So like, this is an event that, let's say from a perspective of future, who then decides so if you're then lending credibility to the idea that physical violence is okay. So then at what point does you opening a can of worms here? You're like, and on top of that, like you said about changing the mind, not just of the person who got knocked out. Is that going to make him less racist because a black guy knocked him out for saying mean words? No. Almost certainly no. Is it going to make other people who are actual racists or who are sliding towards that direction or who are on a fence, let's say, is it going to make them less racist to see a fella who said mean words and then got violently assaulted? Is it going to make them less racist? No.
Yeah, no.
So then,
this is the thing. There was that whole punch a Nazi thing. It got so much traction, and it lacked any intelligent notion as to what the end goal was.
A total lack of appreciation for the realities of violence and how fragile the human body is, and
how fragile the society is that we've built up.
Yeah.
Why is it that I can walk into a shop and walk around the shop, look at things, pick them up, buy them, undergo a transaction, walk past somebody, maybe bump their shoulder, and that doesn't escalate into an all-out war? Like, it's because we've built up these norms. It's not because of anything real or tangible. They're real in a sense. They speak to a truth about the way humans can conduct themselves, but it's all predicated on just accepted ways of being with one another. And as soon as we allow that to crumble, we're not gonna be able to have a firm grasp on anything that approaches modern society. It will just erode, and you will just have people attacking one another like you do in these riots and in these situations in which you basically just got no sense of law and order. It's so dangerous.
Yeah, and it's so naive. It's unbelievably naive, and what worries me greatly is we're only in the beginning stages. Like, this is only starting, and we're looking, and then the US is looking at two trolley problems coming up between the election. Trump wins. It's a trolley problem. Trump wins. Then these Antifa and BLM ideologues kick off. Then there's a reciprocal radicalization and reaction from basically the very people that are genuine racists or have been pushed toward racism by being told that they're racist and seeing videos of black people being justified by supporters of the movement.
Yeah, you don't get to concretize the idea of black and white and say we're black and you're white and you're bad and we're good, and not have that bite you on the arse later down the line when a white person decides, okay, I'm white, fine, you've decided I'm white, apparently that means something. Well then I'm gonna own it. I'm gonna embrace being white, and I'm going to decide it's a really important thing about me. Like, how do you get to create these categories and not have them turn on you?
Not only does it mean something, but it's meant in a derogatory way.
Yeah, this is why I refuse to accept the label of being a white person, because as soon as you start accepting these labels, the label then has to mean something. There's no label you apply to something. Like, I don't call this a bottle and yet not expect it to hold water. If this had a hole in the bottom, it'd be a pretty useless bottle. The label would basically be null and void. We have labels for things so we can identify them. If you want to start calling people, a group of people, white or black, then they're gonna come up with reasons why that actually is saying something true about the person. Yeah.
And it's like this. Yeah, man. I think this the core thing at play here, and this is even a deeper issue, is, and again, just to reuse it for anyone who didn't see the last episode we did. Old fish swimming in the ocean meets two young fish. The old fish is having a great day, says to the younger fish, "How's it going, lads? Water's lovely today, isn't it?" Young fish turn to each other, look at each other funny, turn to the older fish, and one of them says, "What's water?" And there's a lack of appreciation for the water in which we swim that we've gained as a result of the freedoms provided by the Enlightenment in the West, and the separation from church and state, the functioning rule of law, democracy, the ability of markets, and then the emergent civil rights that came off the back of that, as essentially inevitable downstream effects of human freedom being.
I think that's important as well. You used the word inevitable. I think that's important. When you recognize what we recognized during the Enlightenment, I say we as though I had anything to do with it, but what Western society recognized during the Enlightenment was an innate value to humans and an equality of fruit across humanity. It didn't instantaneously end slavery then and there in like 1720, when people started first talking about, wait, all humans are equal. It didn't end it, but what it did is that from that point you can trace forward and say inevitably at some point they will realize the implications of that belief. If you let that play out, the implications of that will be the civil rights movement. Well, first of all, the abolition of slavery, and then, you know, the women and gays and civil rights, like all of this is the fallout of that recognition. And just because humans are flawed,
all humans,
and yeah, exactly, all
regardless of pigmentation or ethnic origin.
Just because there's some cognitive dissonance there's some collective action required, there is an inability to bring to fruition all of the implications of a belief, and it took hundreds of years to play out. We're 300 years later from that belief, and we can attribute to it everything good about the way we can actually look at the Chinese store owner and recognize them to be just as much a human as the Latino woman who, you know, is working as a personal trainer at the gym. All of these people are equal, and in realizing this, we are realizing the values that were not perhaps it would have been conceived of prior to this, but were first truly instantiated in the Enlightened movement, which is now the victim of a rebellion. Like, we are trying to get rid of the very thing that has given us everything. And in doing so, we're still using it to hold people to the standards built on top of that movement. So when we look at something like cops and we say, you don't get to just kill people, that's not cool. You don't get to kill unarmed people when it was clear that they didn't pose a danger. We're using the standards of human interaction that were built upon the idea of a modern society. And I just, you can't continue to use these things and attack them simultaneously. Actually, it speaks to the point you made before about cutting the branch off on top of which you're sitting. These are the things you're using, and so as soon as you rid yourselves of them, it's anarchy.
Yeah, but that's a tap. It's you contrast it again to China. So because China there's fucked up shit happening all over the world, but China is a good example. I think is the best place for us to focus on at the moment because of the scale of the situation. Because it's anyway. Because it's just the perfect contrast where the very things that even allow. So over here, there's protests. I even saw. My buddy was watching a video earlier on today, and when I was hanging out with him, and he had a video of from Toronto, from Antifa, from last month, Antifa occupying the front of some government building in Toronto, and the Canadian officials actually put portaloos there for them. So like, whereas
basically incentivizing them to stay there.
Yeah. Whereas I don't know what happened, but I just found that hilarious. Like I don't know if it's what the story was, but regardless, if you contrast that to the arresting of, let's say, he was released thankfully, but Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong, or you just look at more extreme examples like the fact that 16 people a day on average, according to some stats I saw recently, go missing in China that happen to be civil rights advocates, lawyers, people who are like pro-Tibet, people who talk about civil rights and pro-democracy. People go missing every day in China. And this is like, this is even ignoring vast abuses in the past, like the Tiananmen Square massacre, where pro-democracy protesters, thousands of them, are mowed down by the army. And you're not even allowed to talk about that in mainland China. You can't even discuss it. You not to mind commemorate it.
It's the three T's, isn't it? Tiananmen, Tibet, and Taiwan. You're not allowed to discuss any of the three T's.
Yeah, and in that scenario, there's this total lack of appreciation for, like, there's this focusing on the West as if it's the most evil place on earth, without realizing that the only reason people even get to talk about the West being evil is because they live in the West.
Yeah.
So like and that's such an absurd scenario. And again, to reiterate the caveat, that is not to say things are perfect here, that there isn't tons to be done, but it is the freest place on earth. It is the place on earth from which a civil rights movement can emerge to be able to help those around the rest of the world that are in the most amount of shit. And
imagine it was documented, like an official documented order from the United States government had in it the line, break their lineage, break their roots, break their connections, and break their origins. Round up everyone who should be rounded up. Like, imagine the...
Is that an official Chinese document?
The official orders from the Chinese government.
About the Uyghurs?
About the Uyghurs, yeah. So imagine the aftermath in the discovery of the leaking of these orders. What, and yet, who cares? Who cares that we know with near certainty, because obviously nothing's certain. That's that people were being electrocuted, waterboarded, repeatedly beat. They were being put into stress positions, and they were being injected with mysterious substances. Imagine all of this was taking place, and you just, right, yeah, that's just another thing that's happening in the world. Like, it blows my mind. It blows my mind. I know I'm not doing anything, but I'm trying to figure out why it is that we're not doing anything. At least, like, I don't have the capacity to, fly over to China and not find myself immediately. under police arrest. I want to contribute to doing something about this problem, and yet it remains undiscussed.
But I think the way that the China tribunal closes it off is with political pressure. So the way it actually closes, I can read the last paragraph they wrote, but because they discuss what it is can be done, and I think it relates across the board. But if I take the three kind of archetypes that I presented of the different types of people that are partaking in this Black Lives Matter movement,
believers, bullies, and anti-Western.
Yeah. So I think if I think about the Uyghur situation relative to them, the believers aren't getting exposed to the scale of this situation. And because of the availability heuristic, what they are seeing is this, let's say, this BLM stuff. And they're seeing there's this narrative that they're getting exposed to in the media, and then that's driving what they see to be the biggest problem. Because as you said, loads of people are talking about it, therefore it must be a big issue. And nobody's talking about the Uyghur thing, therefore it can't be a big issue. The second type of people then, a bully doesn't pick on strong people. So these bullies that are these people that are coming from a place of insecurity and a sense of powerlessness and weakness, trying to achieve it or gain a sense of power in the world, they're not going to do that by picking on the biggest, strongest kid in the playground. They're going to do that by picking on what they see as a potential victim over which they can defeat or dominate. Because that's what a bully does. And then the third type of person, it doesn't fit the narrative, especially for it to have been a communist country. It doesn't fit the narrative to target. If you have an anti-Western ideology that you view the Enlightenment as a bad thing and you view the West as an inherently, it's such an oppressive, patriarchal, tyrannical shit show. If you view the West like that, then it doesn't suit your narrative. It doesn't suit your bias to highlight unpleasant things being done against non-white people by other non-white people in other places that aren't in the West. It doesn't suit your bias to address that. So that's what I'm seeing is going on here, is those three types of people. And it's understandable why all three are ignoring this stuff that's happening around the world, and instead are putting an enormously disproportionate amount of energy on problems here in the West, when, again, to reiterate, it is solely our ability, it's solely within our ability, and hence it becomes our responsibility to focus on these major issues around the world, because we are the only people that can do so.
I think we should end it because we like to wrap these things up within a decent time. But as you say, Kieran, I think your categorization of these the distinctions of these three traits within these people, there's something about the psychological weaknesses within each that is contributing to the situation in which we now find ourselves, and it's seriously concerning, because it's not to say today is a uniquely awful time in regard to international affairs, but in the past we've had, well, I keep using the US or the UK have historically had confidence enough in what they've built and their approach to the world and to their population, that they were willing to some degree intervene. And I think that was just I think a lot of that was lost after the failure of the interventions in the Middle East. I think since then there's just there's no self-assuredness or respect for what we have, and from that you just get this inability to look at somebody else and step outside of the awful belief of cultural relativism and actually find yourself in a position to say that's worse than this, and therefore we will try to do something about it. There's people are either too afraid or just too apathetic to be able to look elsewhere and say, no, we're better than that. We are objectively better than that, and therefore we are in a position to help out to whatever degree, in whatever sense it means to help out in that situation.
With that, I think I have the perfect closure to this, which is 2 paragraphs from the very end of the China Tribunal summary judgment, and it basically relates to what an individual can do in the world, which I think are really good. So I'll finish with those. Finally, on actions to be taken, assuming governments do not do as it might be thought they should, the usually powerless, sorry, let me restart that again. Finally, on actions to be taken, assuming governments do not do as it might be thought they should, the usually powerless citizen is, in the internet age, more powerful than he may recognize. Criminality of the order revealed may allow individuals from around the world to act jointly in pressurizing governments so that those governments and other international bodies are unable not to act. So before I read the very last paragraph, very simple. If we assume all politicians are greedy, malevolent monkeys, and if we start from that assumption, they will do what is in their interest to get votes. And if there's enough public pressure, and if they think that they'll get votes and they'll get public support by acting in favor of supporting these people that are in these horrendous situations, whether it be in Libya or China or any of these other scenarios that get highlighted, and we've highlighted today, then they'll be in their interest to do so. So this is where this is the very last paragraph, and this relates especially to China. But the citizen as shopper should not be overlooked. Boycotting of goods started before the American Revolution by Americans in respect of English products and has been an intermittent force ever since against such countries as Israel, America, and South Africa. The effect of boycotting is always uncertain and may be limited. More or most significant for these events is that for much of its customer base, the People's Republic of China is a very long way away, and an individual citizen's conscience-driven response to knowledge of what his or her neighbor is doing may be in inverse proportion to how near that neighbor is. So basically, China is far away and we don't see what's going on, but China relies on the West as its customers. So it's on us. Where do we spend our money? How? Because where we spend money is where we allot power. What kind of sentiment we have and what we give a shit about is what the politicians will do to get our votes. So they're 2 very simplistic ways that are very powerful that each individual can act. What is it we actually give a fuck about, and where do we spend our money? Because that will influence the politicians and the corporations.
Yeah.
And I think that's a kind of to me, that's a handy closing note.
Yeah, no, it's actionable, which is useful. It allows for forward momentum to do something. Okay, cool, man. Yeah. Well, this hasn't been a particularly jovial conversation, but I think it's an important one. Hopefully we can get people to watch it, because that's the problem, isn't it? This isn't a react video to a new song from Blackpink, and so it doesn't get 30,000 views, but perhaps even if it only gets 50, if one of those 50 people are changed by it, then it's maybe worth having the conversation, because that person might go on to change other people's minds.
Yeah, it's just I see this content production as a win-win scenario. It helps me. It helps me
too, yeah.
Think better, and it helps me to talk through things and to be able to hash things out with yourself or any of the stuff that I write, to be able to, it helps to think And it's a win-win then, because I think producing content that we feel needs to exist, regardless, as you said, it's the most honest thing we can do, and it's just casting seeds out there, and if they happen to land on fertile ground, that's a bonus. But I think I'm speaking for myself, and maybe you as well, in that we're acting in a way that allows us to have a clean conscience.
100%. Like you said, I love speaking with you, because it's a means by which I articulate and find out what I think, and then that is its own use to me, and then anything superfluous to that is just bonus. So we will do this again soon. Yeah.
Savage, man, savage. We think maybe another 2 weeks again. We pick a topic, because I'm pretty busy at the moment, and it's handy to be able to we can figure out off the back of this what it is would be worth talking about next. And I'm sure there'll be no shortage of topics.
No, well, absolutely, definitely no shortage of topics. Yeah, it's just about trying to focus on one of them. That's the problem we end up having.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Everything interrelates with one another. It's because we live in one consistent, holistic world. You can't easily rip one thing away from another thing without realizing that everything's tied with one another quite intricately.
Yeah.
Cool, man. You take care then, and we'll talk again in 2 weeks.
Savage. We say that so for now. This the same time, same place, 2 weeks.
We will. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna go off the back of for sure.